How do, Chunky? My name is Alex Belfield. I am the reformed convicted talker, A4747EW. I went to prison for 2.9 years after the BBC began a witch hunt via the corrupt Nottingham police, which landed me in jail for nearly 3 years to write 6 books, which are now available at alexbelfield.com. Since I have been in prison, I have been having therapy on a daily basis so that I can come out and be rehabilitated. So I would like to now make a video about the wonderful BBC that I have been praising for the last 20 years, telling you how wonderful value they are for £175 and how I think their pedo statue on the front of their building is marvellous. This, by the way, is the new star of BBC News. He's going to be called GB News on YouTube, Ginger Bastard News, because it's my little bastard. We don't know who his mother is, but I had a shag with a prison officer at HMP Stocken, and since then he came out of her foo-foo intactus. Anyway, that's not why you called. I'm reformed now. What with being a 0.17% risk to the public and being an ambassador, the new official ambassador for the BBC, the British bottom cream, if I play my cards right, I might end up replacing Tim Divvy, the Director General of the BBC.
Box takers, dinghy divers, and lefties. This ain't for you. Alex Belfield's voice of reason.
Hey, mush, it's only me, Monsieur Belfield, star of stage screen in my back bedroom. I worked for the BBC for 15 years before I became a very, very naughty boy and became a whistleblower for the corporation, for the national newspapers, where I exposed all of their corruption. Well, since I've been to prison and had hypnotherapy treatment by the goons at MOJ, I have realised that I am very, very sorry for pointing fingers at the BBC and saying that they were scoundrels ripping people off with their private business that profits them and not the public that funded those programmes in the beginning. I have learned via my wonderful intensive therapy at HMP that it is absolutely right that the BBC should repeat Jeremy Clarkson's Top Gear on Sunday nights at 6 o'clock on BBC Two, because despite punching a producer and being sacked unceremoniously, several years later we've all forgotten if they can get cheap ratings out of Jeremy on the back of his farm where he's milking cows and sticking his fingers up ewes' bottoms to make sure that they don't have any problems in the anus erectus area. This is brilliant for the licence fee payer. I also want you to know that I think it is absolutely right that the slappers that don't pay their TV licence and end up in prison, which accounts for 1/3 of women in prison in total in the UK, that are sent there by the dark forces at the BBC, is absolutely right. I was trained to believe this whilst I was a hostage at HMP. When you're kidnapped and have therapy, you get to see the light, and the light couldn't be shining brighter in my eye holes that it is absolutely right that the BBC has its own police to intimidate people and then uses the courts to send more women to prison than any other crime in Britain. This is absolutely right. They shouldn't be so rude and discourteous in not paying their TV licence. People mistakenly think when I talk about reform, I'm talking about Nigel Farage's party. I shall make a video about that very soon. No, I'm not. I'm reformed as a convicted talker, as a kidnapped criminal that spent 3 years on his knees being bent over the naughty step of the government. In that time, I learnt several things about programming at the BBC. One, I learnt through hypnotherapy that Nagaman Shushi is a very nice lady and wouldn't possibly bully, intimidate anyone, let alone give a smutty gag or say anything about doing the 1-2 buck of my shoe up trap too. Secondly, I learnt that Vernon Kay is a much better presenter than the once great Steve Wright, who has been now completely usurped in his brilliance by Vernon, who proves on a daily basis by giving a time check every 2.5 minutes that he is in fact the greatest broadcaster in Britain ever. I do not want anybody to think that I am being forced to make this video, even though it is a legal apology. On behalf of the government, I do not want anybody to suspect, blink twice if I'm lying, that this video has been scripted by civil serpents at the government who want me to explain why the Eric Gill statues £500,000 investment to protect it from the wonderful people who helped with its restructuring. I call them the stonemasons, who got up on a ladder and did some adjustments by chopping off the little boy's cock, because the man who invented the Eric Gill aerial statue had in fact raped his 2 daughters and the family dog. I don't want you to think that I don't like the idea of them spending £500,000 to put it behind a glass screen, because I think it should be protected. I also think that Jim will fix it, now then should be brought back to the BBC. And also Rolf Harris's Animal Hospital should be brought back to the BBC, because the BBC press office say that they can't get rid of the pedo statue because it's art. Therefore, I think Jim will fix it, or indeed Jimmy Savile presenting Top of the Pops is also art, and therefore should be returned to prime time. This is one of my favourite planes that I learnt about whilst being rehabilitated by .gov. It is a Fokker 100, one of the best planes in the world, as it has 2 little engines on the back and no engines on the wings, so it therefore is impossible to crash. This plane is a bit like the BBC. It seems to be a work of absolute fiction and magic, because it has no engines on its wings like every other plane. Now, every other commercial entity and broadcaster in Britain has to do what it's called earn fucking money, but the BBC doesn't have to because of the licence fee at a very, 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 very affordable £175, even to pissing pensioners who are disabled, who also are forced to pay it. The TV licence fee is only 60-ish% of the total income of the BBC. The other 1.8 billion is through BBC Studios, the private business that the BBC runs. Now, I say, before, not now, I say before I went to prison, what the fuck is the BBC doing with a private business that earns nearly £2 billion? If it has that, why does it need little old ladies' money? Now I say, having been rehabilitated, that the BBC is a wonderful business that earns millions and billions. Yes, look at this. Look how many billions it earns. And you help it survive. And for the nice people at the BBC to get a pay rise, you need to pay even more money. So I am recommending, as a rehabilitated convicted talker, that it goes up to £200 for the licence fee from next year. It is worth every penny. Some people in the past have said that I've been very, very offensive to the general of the BBC, Sir Tim Divvy, and I've insinuated that he doesn't run the BBC as it should be, which is in the interests of the general public, who are there to be served. Well, I will not say that now, having been rehabilitated, because the man is a genius. He's come up with a cockamamie scheme to charge punters in America to watch the BBC for $6.99 a month. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but I believe that's about £36 a year, which means if you live in America, you can watch the fucking BBC for £140-ish cheaper than you can in Britain, even though it is the British backstabbing corporation. If you can work that out, you see, you are a thicko, because you don't understand that Tim Divvy's got a real plan to celebrate the greatness of Britain by putting EastEnders, by the way, one of the greatest bits of drama ever created in this country. I think you will say that Shakespeare is number 2, EastEnders scriptwriters are number 1, and he is taking EastEnders to the masses in Michigan and Missouri and Las Vegas to promote what London life is really like. Unfortunately for Tim Divvy, he's going to have to up his diversity a bit to make sure that there's lots of people having their phones and watches snatched by people on motorbikes who mostly come from illegal places. Now, since I've been rehabilitated, I do not believe, by the way, that it is wrong to allow unlimited numbers of people into this country. I think they're of great value, especially if they're a male 20 to 30 years old who come from places like Albania, where they don't have any issues with sexual offences whatsoever. I think we need as many people in this country as possible, and as you can see, as a rehabilitated man with a 0.17% risk to the public, I'm of great value to this country. In fact, I could be replacing Angelica Growler as the Deputy Prime Minister as we speak. May I also, as a newly rehabilitated gobshite and convicted talker, make it very clear after my radiotherapy from the MOJ goons and mafia that I think Scott Mills is a wonderful broadcaster and is far better than anything that Terry Wogan, Sir Terry, could ever have achieved. I think the brilliance, the comic timing and the ingenuity of something like Scott Mills is only to be applauded. And if I had my way, we'd have more homosexuals at BBC Radio 2. In fact, they'd be on 24/7, and Scott Mills would be on morning, noon and night. In fact, he'd be up at the crack of dawn, although I do suspect he wouldn't be interested in dawn's crack. Since finding myself on many rehabilitation courses at the HMP, I would like to make it absolutely clear that I think that Sir Gary Lineker was very much worth every penny that the BBC have paid him over the 75 years that he was at the corporation. I think he was the backbone of BBC Sport, and I don't know how that programme would have survived without his commentary, his vocal dexterity, and his ability to have such huge personality and also incredibly unfeasibly large ears. Now, you may have realised that I've been forced to make this video by the lawyers, which is very embarrassing. And unfortunately, I would like to introduce you to GB News. Yes, this is little ginger bastard with his news channel coming to YouTube very soon, but he's got a cold today. So I was going to ask him, what do you think of the BBC? But he's just got a terrible, horrible cough, and he keeps coughing all the time, which is really unfortunate. Are you okay? Do you need to suck on something? Maybe a fisherman's friend. And the problem with little ginger bastard is his mother and I met at HMP Stockton, and MOJ are very, very sorry about it. But she was a big-boned woman, your mother, wasn't she? And you could fondle her all night and never touch the same place twice. But the thing is, we are here to apologise to the BBC because we feel sorry for them, don't we? Stop coughing. This is professional broadcasting and show business. And these people, unfortunately, we feel very, very sorry that you have to be, part of something that is so maligned. But with me being rehabilitated now, of course, everything's fine. And I think you're wonderful. I think you're worth every penny. And I think when GB News gets on the air, I think they will be a rival to BBC News. With you and your journalists who are going to do a wonderful job. So that's it from me, Alex Belfield, News at 10. Talking of which, what happened to that Hugh Edwards? I notice he isn't on the news anymore. When I've been watching, I noticed there's a gentleman of colour doing it now, but no Hugh Edwards. Do we know why he went? Oh, really? Right. How much did he pay for those? Right. Good Lord. And that's like 2 licence fees to buy videos of children being... And he still gets his BBC pension. You could say this is somewhat of an embarrassing morning to be bringing out a video in support of the BBC, what with their shenanigans at the weekend with a young man of colour who was live on the TV at 10 o'clock in the morning, effing and blinding, and then ending up saying things about certain religious groups that if I said, I'd end up with a life sentence, never mind 5.5 years. As a rehabilitated man and convicted talker, I have to tell you that I support the BBC's decision to broadcast this gentleman of colour's opinions because they are the home of free speech. We know that they are very, very pro-all opinions. And we encourage the BBC to continue to allow people to say fuck and cunt on the TV at 10 o'clock in the morning when children are watching, because I think this is the future of broadcasting, and it proves how they've evolved. If they want to slag off certain ethnic and religious groups, that's fabulous. And it proves that they are, in fact, with the times. Since we learnt in law that a man has to have a cock and balls, but a lady, unfortunately, cannot have half an inch and a dozen wrinkles, I think it's quite illuminating that the BBC are taking such grand steps to allow this gentleman of colour to have his say. And I do encourage the police not to get involved in this. He's absolutely entitled to his opinion. Unlike Lucy Connolly and I, who for words have gone to prison for offending people, I think it's brave of the BBC to stand by this young man and allow him to have his say. Since having my coffee enemas and being anally probed whilst in custody to reform me completely and rehabilitate me in entirety, I have learned firsthand that the BBC should not be blamed for its culture of cover-up and indeed its attraction to those who are interested in underaged people. Whilst I was at Five Wells, HMP Five Wells for many months, I worked next to a man called Mike Souter, who is yet another BBC nonce. I got quite an insight from this man as we worked on the radio station and magazine together. Yes, you couldn't fucking make it up, but I did. And this BBC paedophile was very interesting and is featured in my book. It's called HMP, A Complete Waste of Doing Time. That will be the second HMP book I will be releasing later in the autumn. Immediately, my autobiography is available, which tells the story of my time at the BBC, from being 18 years old with alcoholics and perverts at BBC Radio Nottingham to my time at BBC Radio Leeds, where I resigned. So all in all, the autobiography is a must-read if you want to see how rehabilitated I am and how sorry I am that the BBC is so misunderstood, that so many people believe it's a nonce factory. The question is, as a licence fee payer, who do you think is the Bobby Dazzler and who do you think is the villain? So, my friends, it is important that we think before we speak. Today is the hottest day of the year. I am already sweating like Hugh Edwards outside a primary school, but that's not why you called. A week from last night we'll be back with the phone in. I can't wait to get booming out your woofers and to indeed be churning out my guff as a convicted talker. I can now return to the airwaves completely rehabilitated in the hope that if I play my cards right, I will end up back on the BBC because they're wonderful. Look into my eyes, look into my eyes, look into my eyes, talking. Ooh, I am rehabilitated. Pay your licence fee, my friend, and don't say any of these naughty words like shit, or indeed whack job, or indeed nonce. That would be very inappropriate. Think before you speak and always repeat after me. Pay your licence fee. It is very good value for £175, even though Americans are only paying 36. Bastards. I can already see in the comments that people are saying I'm not taking this legal apology seriously. Well, I can tell you I am. I am an ambassador now for the BBC, having been rehabilitated, and it is only right and just that I apologise to the corporation for any distress caused to them and embarrassment in the 10 years that I was their number one whistleblower for the national newspapers, who paid my mortgage and bought lots of bricks for my house, in exposing things like the thousands and thousands of pounds worth of hotels, taxis, trains and hotels that they book each year and don't use. For 3 years in the Sun, I was able to expose the Gillard Awards, which cost the public coming on for £100,000 with travel, so that 100 people from BBC local radio could go and have a piss up and say that they're so talented they're only competing with themselves, which is like having an award ceremony for the least smelliest shit. If I play my cards right, I could end up filling in for Rylan, and I understand there is a large queue, but nevertheless, it's a hole that has to be filled, and an opportunity that I think could be very, very, very encouraging for my CV. So as a 0.17% risk to the public, as a man who is a former convicted talker who is now completely rehabilitated, I want to say to you once and for all, the BBC are wonderful. They would never lie, and any paedophiles that happen to have been there is purely by a complete and utter mistake. And as for spending £500,000 renovating their pedo statue on the front of their HQ, well, it is a beautiful piece of art, even though its creator raped its 2 daughters and the family dogs. This is Alex Belfield, News at 10, live from Nottingham. I'll be back with my phone in next week, by the way. Yes, Sunday night, 9 o'clock, it will be there, and the autobiography tells you everything about my life and career at the BBC. 15 years of working with them. It's a 5-star review, don't you worry about that. See you Sunday night from 9 for the phone in, live across the world.
Don't trust the mainstream media. They'll make your teeth itch. Alex Belfield's voice of reason.